All right. Hi, everybody. We got lots of people still rolling in. I'm going to keep hitting that admit all button. I'm going to get started right away. Well, I'm also sort of managing the room as well because I've realized I didn't bring in an assistant for the room. Um, but it's great to see everybody. And let me just get my notes up here. Um, so welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here and for joining us today for this really important conversation related to student behavior and safety and mental health and well-being. I'm just really thrilled and excited to see the engagement in the session, and I'm just excited to be connecting with all of you and to have you connecting here with each other as well, and to introduce you to our amazing panel that we have with us today. Before we dive in, just a quick overview of what you can expect for the session today, because I know an hour is going to fly by really quickly. I keep having to flip back, letting people back in and forth. So we're going to kick off with a very quick intro, which we're in the middle of. And then we're going to spend about 30 to 35 minutes with the panel answering some questions that I prepared in advance. After that, then we're going to shift into an open Q&A for those of you who are here that have questions for the panel. We might not have time to get into all of the answers, but we will take those questions away and make sure to follow up if we do run out of time. I really want to make sure that this is an engaging conversation for all of you and an opportunity for you to connect with each other as well. So I encourage you to please participate in the chat. If you are open to doing so, please share your name, your district, what role you are in, and the work that you are doing in the realm of student safety and mental health. As I ask the panel questions, please feel free to share your thoughts and experiences in the chat as well. Our hope is really that this is going to be the beginning of continued connections and conversations as a group together or offline going forward amongst yourselves. Some of you might already know each other, so maybe there's some familiar names and faces popping up. I'm just bringing more people in here. Let's make sure everybody gets in. So just if there are people that you don't know that you're seeing today, please say hi. My motto is always that a stranger is just a friend that you haven't met yet. So I hope that today you're going to leave with some new friends who, again, you're all in the realm of student safety and well-being. You're all doing similar work. So please make sure to stay connected with each other. We really want to showcase and highlight the amazing work that our panel districts are doing in an effort to improve and support their students' well-being, but we really also want to capture the work that you're all doing in your own districts as well. So again, please engage in the chat. Perhaps you're going to find alignment to your current practices, or there might be aspects of today's conversation that are going to inspire new approaches for your districts to take in this like ever evolving frontier that is supporting this current generation of kids and students. The session is being recorded. So it will be shared with you afterwards, so you can watch it back if you'd like, or you can share it with your colleagues. And I'm also planning on capturing the chat as well and turning that into a follow-up resource as well, so that we're capturing every aspect of our time together today. I'm just going to admit some more people who have popped in. And I guess I'll just start with a quick introduction. My name is Erin Pickles. I'm the community manager for Imagine Everything. For those of you who may not be familiar with Imagine Everything, we are a Canadian K-12 community partner that has been working with districts across Canada with different projects and solutions that range from student safety and well-being to student supports and planning and other things. Our founding project is called Student Aware, and our panel of guests today are joining us from districts that are a part of that project community, and they're utilizing that as a tool to support their work in supporting their students' well-being. And so we won't focus on Student Aware today. We can certainly, if there's interest, if you'd like to learn more about Student Aware itself and the project and the tool, we can certainly talk about that another time. But for today, we really want to focus on the whole picture of work and the processes that are in place surrounding these districts' priorities and practices. And we'll bring awareness to Student Aware as just a piece to the broader picture of the work that they're doing. And I guess as on a personal note, I'm a mom. I have a son and daughter who are twins in grade 10. My youngest son is in grade 7. And I am really witnessing firsthand how different childhood in the teenage years are compared to what my own was. And I can see and hear the challenges that they or their friends are experiencing. And it can lead to kind of difficult conversations, and it's hard to know what approach to take. But I am really encouraged and inspired by the caring educators and support staff like yourselves that are seeing the need for this critical work. And for districts that are prioritizing initiatives and practices to support their students, they say it takes a village to raise a child, and you are all part of very important villages. So thank you for your care and concern and interest in the topic and joining us today. I just want to make sure we've got no one else in the waiting room. Nope, we're doing good. So let me introduce you to the panel. First off, we have Scott Gillam from Limestone District School Board in Ontario. He is currently the Superintendent of Curriculum and Program Services, focused on student support services and Indigenous education. Scott and his team at Limestone joined the Imagine Everything community in 2017. They were actually the first district to join the project in Ontario. And so while Scott's direct oversight on the project has shifted, his colleagues, Patty Gollagy and Wendy, they continue to support the day-to-day work of the project. And Scott brings such a thoughtful and inspiring perspective and approach to addressing student behavior and supporting students through a really positive and proactive lens of care. And that's really what inspired the article that was shared with the invitation to this event. And it's also what inspired the name of today's session, which is Connection Before Correction. So we're just really thrilled to have Scott here. Thank you so much for joining us. Next, we have our friends from Waterloo Catholic District School Board. We have Erin Schrader, and we had intended for Allison Mesmer to join us, but unfortunately she's come down with a sick bug. So we're just grateful to have Nikki Stewart here joining us in her place. Erin is the lead social worker for their board, and she oversees and supports all the district's social workers and the work that they are all doing. Allison and Nikki, they're both social workers, and Allison currently is the lead for the Student Aware project for the board. However, Nicole or Nikki was previously in that seat, so she can speak to the day-to-day work that's happening that Student Aware is impacting as well. Their superintendent, Judy Merkel, was the lead on this initiative initially in 2018. So they came into the community not long after Limestone. And she has really focused her work even more broadly across the district in all things student mental health and well-being across the district. So really, really excited to have you all here. I do want to mention that Erin will have to hop off the conversation at about the 45-minute mark. So when you see her disappear from the panel, don't be concerned, she's okay. But we're just thrilled and grateful to have her here for the time that we can. So with the panel here, you're going to have Erin and Nikki for like the boots on the ground day-to-day experience and insights. And then we've got Scott for the broader leadership approach when it comes to student mental health initiatives and well-being. So thank you all so much for being here. The time is flying already, so we're just going to dive right into the questions. So my first question here, I feel like Jimmy Fallon right now with my cards, but I've prepared my questions in advance. Scott, you and I chatted not long ago, and you shared a concept that has like just been sitting with me in my heart. So you had said that there's a concept of a caring adult for every child. And I came across a similar quote that said, every kid is one caring adult away from being a success story. And we unfortunately know that not every child has that caring adult at home or in their community, and that really having a supportive school community can really just be a lifeline for those students. So I say that as I frame the first question, which I'll be asking for all of you. We know that student behavior is often a reflection of deeper needs or challenges. How has your district shifted from a punitive model of discipline to a more supportive, preventative approach? And what have you learned in the process of doing that?
Great, and I think I'll start off, and I'll talk big picture and briefly, so that perhaps some questions come out at the end around kind of the bigger idea. I just want to recognize that I'm coming from you to you today from Kingston, Ontario, which is on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee. but we celebrate and honor the commitment to the land from all of our First Nations and Métis and Inuit partners. So not unlike many of you across Ontario, but also across Canada, we have really been trying to make a concentrated shift from a punitive model of discipline that is typically centered around suspensions, expulsions, and words like zero tolerance to a more supportive, preventative approach. And really what we're trying to do there is address the root causes of behavior and fostering not only a positive school climate, but a community climate. And critical to this is a connection to at least one adult. And I would say the more connections, the better. But it's that one connection piece that's really critical. And I'll talk about it later, but when we first instituted Student Aware, the critical piece for us was ensuring that any student that came on our radar or across our desk, our first question was always, who are they connected to? Not what are they doing or what did they do or what kind of trouble have they been in the past, is are they connected to an adult? That became our real focus. Some of the things we're doing top level here is just looking at the implementation of restorative practices and much like many of you, really expanding our social emotional learning in our classrooms through the integration of that through our in-school teams, as well as increased mental health supports as able. We know that finite resources don't always allow us to do that, but it's a critical piece for us. As well as tiered interventions through a multi-tiered system of supports. And I can talk a bit about that if we have time with respect to how schools identify the most critical of needs and the prioritization of that work. And that has to be connections to grown-ups. And then finally, using our data monitoring, we really carefully look at our equity data. And what we're hearing loud and clear from our students and our families is our students aren't feeling connected. Our marginalized students, as well as our students with special education needs. So ensuring that they have a connection has been critical. What we've learned through all of this, relationships are foundational. Trust, if a student trusts an adult in the building, we are able to divert all kinds of behavior and all kinds of issues. Training and buy-in are essential, so it's critical that you get that message out. And there's lots of great literature out there. Lost at Schools, probably the foundation that we've been using here for many, many years around what's the lagging skill, what's the connection to a grown-up. We have to keep going with the discipline reform because it's really easy to fall back into old habits where a kid does something and our immediate response is a consequence. And we know prevention actually works. When students are taught expectations explicitly, they feel emotionally safe and they know that they have access to support, behavioral issues decrease and academic outcomes improve. Our transition hasn't been without its challenges, and I would say we have a long way to go like everybody else. But we do feel our schools are more inclusive and responsive, and the human-centered educational environment for students to feel accepted and safe. Students are not only learning about academics, and this is key for us, they are learning how to be a part of a community. And I'll turn it over to my colleagues.
I love that. Yeah. Aaron, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Very similar to Scott, we believe that safe and caring communities underpin every aspect of the teaching and learning environment, and that's relational safety. So the felt sense that one belongs, that students are treated fairly and that they're cared for, that those sorts of strategies are really essential to students' ability to engage, to learn, and to thrive. And so creating safe and caring schools is not just about rules and discipline or preventing harm, but it's also about building environments where every student feels a sense of belonging, trust, and possibility. So research, we know, tells us that students learn and thrive the best when they experience predictable, supportive, and relationship-rich environments. So our Safe Schools approach is really built on this understanding. And rather than focusing solely on external control or punitive measures, we're committed to helping students develop their own internal capacity to manage their stress response, to navigate conflict, repair relationships, strengthen their sense of belonging and contributions to their school community. It's really a multi-layered effort across the system, from trauma-informed classroom practices to student-led safe school ambassador programs, restorative alternatives to suspension, anonymous reporting tools, all programs that are designed to foster well-being, fairness, accountability, and growth. More specifically, in terms of what we've learned, we really continue to learn the importance of staying the course with respect to the 3 pillars of our mental health plan as schools gain traction and they build capacity. So those pillars include trauma and stress-informed classroom practices rooted in the concepts of strong relationships and connection, predictability paired with flexibility, educators who delight in their students, and co-regulation when students are struggling. The second pillar of our plan is social and emotional learning, through which students learn lessons about the brain and the nervous system, and skills are built in the area of executive functioning, relationship building, identifying and managing emotions, motivation and perseverance, and self-awareness and coping. And then the third pillar is regulated adults, and that's really at the foundation that students need calm, attuned adults to create a sense of safety and connection, very similar to what Scott has just shared, and he and I did not collaborate on what we were going to say today. So really believing that educators need to be supported in maintaining their own emotional regulation in order to best support students.
Amazing. Thank you both for that. I'm just realizing that the chat, because of the number of people have come in, has disabled. So if you are trying to engage in the conversation like I was hoping we would be able to, I apologize for that. We'll see. I'm gonna ask that maybe some of you try and put a message in if you can. But yeah, thank you so much for those answers, Scott and Aaron. My next question is for Aaron and Nikki, or for one of you. From a district social work perspective, what are the biggest challenges that you are seeing and experiencing in supporting student mental health? And what new approaches are you finding are helping to address them?
This likely won't come as a surprise to any of my colleagues in the room. We continue to be challenged by the depth and the complexity of student needs and situations that are influenced by a wide variety of factors, things like poverty, disproportionate access to care, the impact of trauma, social media, mental health, substance use issues, all of which are impacting well-being and the ability of our students to access education. So the tiered model of care that's delivered in the province, guided by School Mental Health Ontario, it assists us as a system by providing structure to support mental health education, prevention, and intervention in collaboration with our community partners through the Ministry of Health. And we're moving, as we all know, tools forward like measurement-based care in the education sector. And student aware specifically, it helps us in identifying vulnerable students. And these are students who are experiencing suicidal ideation, might be at risk of child exploitation, are engaged in bullying, or considering school violence. And when we pick up those concerns through student online searches, anecdotally, I feel really confident in saying that we identify some of those issues early when there remains an opportunity to intervene by way of offering supports. I'll pass it over to Nikki to give you a more detailed response, Erin.
Hi, everyone. So I think, as Aaron mentioned, one of the biggest challenges we're seeing is that increasing complexity and intensity of student mental health need. Many students are navigating concurrent difficulties such as anxiety, depression, trauma, identity-related stress, and these often intersect with social pressures, academic demands, and family challenges. And then the demand for school social work in turn continues to be high. Another key challenge is access to Tier 3 services for students and families who require more intensive or ongoing mental health care. This often applies to students and families who face barriers in accessing community services for a variety of reasons. While schools are often the most consistent point of contact for students, this can result in increased demands on school-based resources that are not typically or ideally set up to support the intensity of care that many of these kiddos and their families need. So that said, there are promising shifts happening, however. Boards are engaged in important work at the Tier 1 level, for example, embedding wellness and trauma-informed practices into classrooms, training staff in suicide prevention, and helping students to be aware of supports that are available to them and to reduce stigma around asking for help. The Student Aware program specifically has been an important part of prevention and early intervention efforts. It gives us a way to proactively identify students who may be struggling but haven't spoken up yet, allowing for early check-ins and connections to support. Over the past 6 years, we have come to understand that many of the students flagged by this program, particularly in the realms of suicide and self-harm, are not young people that are traditionally on school staff radar, so to speak, meaning that they would not necessarily have been identified, or at least not as soon, if it weren't for the Student Aware program. And finally, employing a collaborative approach both internally and with our community partners allows for multidisciplinary and often a more cohesive intervention for students and families, which in turn can help prevent future difficulty.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. Um, I feel like I'm racing through questions because we've got so many and I want to make sure there's time for Q&A. So the next one is actually for all of you. I've visited both of your district websites and it's clear that your leadership is really prioritizing student safety, mental health, well-being. Erin, you really, highlighted and focused on the ones that Waterloo Catholic is focusing on. So building a culture of care does require more than just intention. It does require structure. So what kinds of policies and processes or team collaboration have helped you embed mental health and safety into the daily fabric of the district? I don't know who wants to go first. I guess, Scott, I'll call on you first to answer that one.
Sure. Thank you. In our district, embedding mental health and safety into our daily operations has really required an intentional alignment between leadership, policy, and practice. A few key approaches that have helped us with that is certainly it starts at the policy level commitment. So we've implemented a district-wide, as many in Ontario have, a mental health and well-being strategy, a 3-year plan and a 1-year plan. But we've also dug a little bit deeper into that and connected safety with respect to the responsibilities connected to those plans, referral processes, crisis response protocols, and so on. The policy certainly has educators and support staff have a key role to play in that. We also have a mental health leadership committee at Limestone that plays a critical role, and that's made up of a wide variety of stakeholders throughout the system, including students and caregivers. The other thing that's been critical for us is the notion that we have in-school teams that are tasked with the prioritization of needs and supports for both mental health concerns as well as safety concerns throughout the school. These multidisciplinary in-school teams include administrators, counselors, social workers, psychologists, and speech language pathology. And they are to meet regularly, work with the in-school team, and a key piece here is to identify and prioritize the needs and then create proactive plans to meet those needs as best they can head on. Another key piece for us is the embedding of professional learning into everything we do. So we try to integrate trauma-informed practices, mental health first aid, and de-escalation strategies into almost every single piece of PD that we do. It's become the umbrella of the work that we do, along with Indigenous ways of knowing and being and doing, and so that all of our PD work has those elements woven throughout them. We attempt to do as much data-informed intervention as possible through anonymous climate and wellness surveys at different intervals during the year. And finally, a real key piece for us is collaborating with our community partners so that we are able to increase not only on-site counseling availability, but also easier access to off-site services for families in need, including over the summer when we're not typically in operation. By treating mental health and safety not as a one-time initiative, but as core operating principle with structures, people, and time dedicated, we've seen real shifts in both school climate and staff morale, but we know we have lots of work to keep doing.
That's great. Thank you, Scott. Erin, do you have any thoughts you'd want to share?
Just add a few pieces. It feels seamless to me from where I sit within the organization. And that may in part be because our Safe Schools portfolio and our mental health portfolio are housed with one superintendent who oversees both. And then I too have responsibilities for both. And so we've intentionally moved our tier 1 mental health planning alongside Safe Schools with a view that as schools become trauma informed, as they embed social and emotional learning practices in classrooms and learn about neuroscience, we create safety in our schools and an ability for students to access curriculum. The student aware coordinator role that we have, I would also highlight as an example of that collaboration between these two portfolios. It's funded and housed within Safe Schools, but it's a partnership with social work. And we intentionally chose the role to be led by a regulated mental health professional who would have a lens of both student mental health and well-being alongside safe school concerns like sexual assault, violent behavior, and so on. I'll pass it over to you, Nikki.
Thanks. Yeah, and I think the only piece that I would add there is that our programming at the tier 2 and tier 3, that's a tongue twister, informs the work we do to support mental health at tier 1. So the collaboration across tiers helps ensure alignment and targeted programming based on student need, including those identified by trends and flagged searches via Student Aware. We have a number of policies in place as well, guiding our school responses to concerns like suicidal ideation and self-harm, human trafficking, student sexual assault, and violence threat risk assessment. And these policies help ensure that school responses to many of the concerns outlined above remain consistent across the system.
Thank you. Okay, Emily, I see your question in the chat, and I'm going to see if I can pin that. We'll circle back at the Q&A at the end to give you some more insight on that position. Okay, next question for all the panelists. So Allison and I, we were chatting, and it actually touches on, I think, Nikki, you also sort of mentioned this as well, that when it comes to the investigations that are surfaced in Student Aware, a lot of times it's students that are really flying under the radar. They're students that the school or the principal may not have ever thought might be struggling or isn't showing behavior issues that would be, presenting any attention. So how, do you have a sense of what early signs of students that might be struggling at the school that the schools might often be missing? Let me go back and ask that again a little bit more clearly. Do you have a sense of what early warning signs of students who may be struggling that schools are often missing, and how can educators and school staff become more attuned to those signs? So that's for all of you. I had thought maybe Allison could answer first, but Aaron or Nikki, if you want to answer that question first.
Yeah, I can speak to that. I mean, in terms of working directly with the Student Aware program, I think it's added a lot of insight and depth in our response to student needs, especially when it comes to that early intervention and safety piece. When an alert comes in, it flags a potentially concerning search made on a school-issued device or account, and then this may relate to things like self-harm, child exploitation, pornography, and so on. The Student Aware Coordinator reviews the alert to assess context and urgency, and from there we quickly collaborate with the school staff to investigate the situation further and determine next steps. This can include things like a conversation with the student, a phone call to parents, activation of additional board supports and protocols if needed, or offers of connection to community services as well. In rare cases, when the nature of the search results in an investigation and the results of that investigation are particularly worrisome, consultation with police, hospital, or child welfare services may take place as well. What's most powerful, however, though, I think, Aaron, speaks to your point initially, which is that the system is helping us catch things that students may not be saying out loud. So specifically, again, it's allowed us to connect with kids that are quietly struggling, sometimes before any outward signs are visible. And we've been able to offer mental health services and support, and even sometimes just caring conversations that may not have happened otherwise, or not as quickly had it not been for the identification through those flags. So in short, it allows us to catch things before they become a crisis, ideally.
Yeah, that's amazing. Aaron or Scott, do you have things you'd like to add?
Yeah, I can jump in unless Aaron, you want to. Yeah, I just some of the key indicators for us, and again, this comes back to this: if these students are not connected to a caring adult in one way, shape, or form, it's very difficult to identify things like changes in engagement, inconsistent attendance. Again, we have an attendance goal in Ontario, but I think digging down deeper into that and really looking at some of the root causes for that, shifts in behavior, academic fluctuations, social isolation, these would all be extremely difficult to engage with if they're not connected to an adult. And the biggest issue for us is sometimes these emerge gradually. So there's not a consistent way to document these. And students have become quite good at masking it and holding it all together on the surface. And yet there are some clear-cut signs that things are not okay. And we know that our educators and support staff have limited bandwidth to deal with these emerging issues and are typically focused on the acute things that arise. So we really are trying to prioritize that relationship building so that they are better attuned to identifying this, training this notion across disciplines. The caring adult doesn't have to be a teacher or EA or a social worker. It could be the custodian. It could be the librarian. Adults are, there's lots of them in the building, and really including them in this notion of every kid needs a caring adult is really important, not only to build the team at the school level, but also the importance of supporting students across all kinds of different variations. However, this is where data and sometimes the right tool comes in. When used ethically, thoughtfully, this helps patterns emerge, and students that were flying under the radar all of a sudden pop up. And the question for us here at Limestone is that student connected to an adult? That's the very first call when we notice a pattern or a concerning search. The call to the administration is not about, hey, do you know what this kid is doing? The call is, hey, is so-and-so connected to an adult? And if the response is not, we're not, or if the response is we're not sure or no, we know we have some work to do building that capacity up, and we might not necessarily get into the details of what the search was, but we need to get that student connected to an adult.
Amazing. Thank you. Erin, anything you wanted to add, or do we want to move to the next question? I feel like the time is just flying, but do you want to add anything?
Just say something really, really quickly.
Yes.
And I think one of the pieces that's really important is establishing pathways of care for students so that they really understand how it is that they go to ask for help when they need it. And it doesn't have to be that they ask for help at school. It can be that they ask for help in the community. And so for us, we've really tried to work hard and work intentionally on how it is that we inform students of those pathways, and trying to do that across a multitude of platforms. So we try to do that electronically through D2L. We try to do that through posters. We try to do that through conversations that happen, as Scott's already articulated. And I think hopefully all of those various ways help our students to find their way to the help that they need.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing all of that. That's really, I don't know. As a parent, I just am like so grateful to all of you for doing that. So next question is for Scott. Your district was an early adopter of Student Aware. So what originally motivated your district to explore this kind of tool, and how has it changed the way that you think about student safety and intervention?
Yeah, the timing was just right. We had just recently done some work with Kevin Cameron around violence threat risk assessment. And one of the things, if you've had the training through Kevin, is that notion of the empty vessel and things on the internet filling up that vessel. And right around the time that we adopted this, we had seen multiple pretty large scale events occur. And each one of these students had quite a significant online profile. And we started thinking about, wouldn't it be great if we had been able to identify that online presence a little bit earlier in the progression or the continuum down the pathway to potential school violence or suicide ideation. And then we were aware of Student Aware and looked at the product. And what really became clear to us is that there's quite a large continuum of students who are searching things. And sometimes it's curiosity, and most of the time, good news is it's curiosity. But every once in a while, a student will return to a site or change to a different site. And what we found out really quickly is that typically an online search is a cry for help. And if you're aware of Kevin's work, cry for help can come in many different variations and formats. And for us here in Limestone, this online work really was a way for us to identify students who were having a cry for help. And then we could intervene based on, again, that connection back to the school. If the student's well connected to the school and has a good connection there, then sometimes we'll lay back and let the school sort that out, letting them know there's a concern. If there's no connection, then we move to a whole different strategy of trying to connect that student to somebody. So it really it came out of Kevin's work, the notion that there's a cry for help, and us knowing that we could get out ahead of some of these students traveling down that pathway earlier, and provide them with the support that they needed. Never once did we consider it as a tool to nail kids and suspend them for what would only, what some are very serious searches being done on our computers in our class time. And so it really wasn't about punishment, it was about support.
Yeah, I love how you mentioned that too. I think, student aware is monitoring point of search. So it's really looking at like what they're putting into the search engines. And I think it's like they're thinking with their fingertips. They think that, they're just putting a thought in what's in their mind. So it gives you a chance to really kind of peek into what that child is thinking. Um, so yeah, that's a great call out. So Scott, when your district did start exploring implementing a tool like Student Aware, which is monitoring students, how did you navigate the internal conversations around liability and privacy and risk? And then what helped you move those conversations from hesitation to confidence in taking action with the project?
Yeah, yeah, really, really quickly, again, coming at it from the point of view that we were trying to prevent significant episodes initially, but then moving into ensuring that students were connected with caring adults. When that is kind of the, big umbrella idea for the school board, it wasn't hard to convince folks that this was a real good way of finding opportunities to intervene and make sure kids were supported. We have what I'm sure many of you do. We have an agreement that students and parents sign off around the use of the internet, the use of our equipment and our brand name when they're using websites, and really Student Aware only works for those products. So it wasn't really difficult to go down that road, that if you're using a Limestone email address or a Limestone computer to access this information, then you've been told, we've informed you that the information that we gather through your searches is not a private information. And so it wasn't really hard to do, and we have countless cases early on in the adoption of Student Aware where we intervene in significant events that would have led to quite large scale events. And the more that happens, the easier it is to talk about risk mitigation as opposed to the liability of somebody coming back and saying, well, you're actually spying on my web searches, when in fact, if you're using our equipment and our namesake, then we are entitled to that. So I didn't want to get too much into that, but it wasn't a hard sell here. Again, the purpose is to prevent student actions that have significant consequences and to ensure connectivity to adults. And that's an easy sell around here.
Yeah. And to kind of add, in my experience too, in talking to districts who had concerns about like, well, what are the parents going to think about like my kids being monitored? They were actually surprised to find out that the parents were like, you mean you haven't already, but like you don't already have a tool like this in place? So yeah, I think it's still something that is top of mind during the Student Aware project conversations, is the liability piece. But yeah, I think that your district's approach, Scott, and mindset is great. Next question is going to be for Nikki and Aaron, or one or both of you. Technology like this can be really controversial, and I think it's going to tie in nicely to what we were just talking about, especially when it involves monitoring students. So how do you communicate to students and families and staff that tools like Student Aware are about care and not control, or not trying to be like a gotcha, you're in trouble? It's a more I see you, you matter type thing. So Aaron, did you want to share?
That's a really good question. From the outset of looking into and launching the Student Aware program, we've consistently communicated in board reports, messaging to administrators and families that really this program is the result of a fundamental concern for student mental health and safety. And we know student online behavior and activity plays a role in shaping their behavior, their mental health, their character, and really their overall well-being. So we really talk about the board having shared stewardship with respect to student engagement in the online community. And we aim, to build digital citizenship in our students while being accountable and successful contributors to what is now a global society. So in that context of really prioritizing safe schools, we have been committed, like Scott described, to maintaining a level of oversight within our school's online communities. Clear identification of the student aware program, the categories of searches that it monitors, and the role of the coordinator are detailed in our AP memo on responsible use of technology and electronic data access, and the same consent form that's reviewed yearly by parents. So, we inform parents and families of the existence of the program, but we also balance that with maintaining a little bit of a low profile, because we know the students may avoid using their board login if we were to advertise strongly that we're doing that. So it's a bit of a balance around balancing the transparency without really advertising. And then our tier 1 programming for students and caregivers is really informed by student aware. And we do that work between our mental health lead and our innovation consultants. And so our families get to be participating in things like learning opportunities on topics around cell phone use and social media, education on human trafficking. Internally, we've done suicide prevention and life promotion work. So just as Scott explained, those two things are really intimately connected.
That's great. Thanks so much, Erin. We're doing great for time because I've been watching. I know Erin does have to hop off, so I'm like, I got to get these questions in. So we've reached the last question, and it's for all three of you. If you could offer one piece of advice to districts and boards that are looking to create safer, more supportive school environments, what would it be? Erin, do you want to start?
You want me to go first?
Sure. Okay.
Sorry, Scott.
Oh,
I'm the one who's
sorry, I guess
exiting
Scott was
early.
off mute already. Anyway, sorry. You're it, Erin.
You want me to go? Okay.
Sure.
Okay. I really don't know that there's a single piece of advice. I learned from every board that I have the opportunity to collaborate or communicate with, and we have shared goals and varied ways of implementing programming. I've learned today from listening to Scott talk, and so I just really appreciate that opportunity. And I'm sure there's comments in the chat that I will also learn from. What's been key for us is a strategy like the planning as a leadership team across all 3 tiers of mental health programming, while partnering specifically with Safe Schools to ensure there's alignment. So that's really what's been most important for us. Nikki, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with Erin. I think our greatest asset is each other. And while each board may encounter their own unique challenges based on their specific student community, I think on the whole, we have a lot in common, and therefore there's a lot of opportunity to learn from one another. In the student aware role coordinator, like the student aware coordinator position specifically, I also really appreciated the opportunity to collaborate frequently with Imagine Everything, because they were sort of our central hub, and they've got their finger on the pulse of what's happening across the country. And so that was really beneficial to have that open and ongoing dialogue, because it allowed us to stay on top of trends. It gave us some insight into what might be coming next. And all of that was really, it was priceless information to have in terms of really embedding that preventative nature of the program. And I think just in general, that ongoing collaboration, it just gives us all an opportunity to hone our interventions and better support our students and families in the process.
That's amazing. Yeah, I think teamwork. Sorry, Scott, not to cut you off. Sorry. Here, I'm like, make you go last, and I cut you off. I apologize. But yeah, I just feel like it's like a Wild West right now, a new frontier. So it's hard to know and how to navigate. So I do think that we all get better together. So, Scott, over to you.
Yeah, one key piece of advice I would offer is to prioritize the authentic ongoing communication between students, staff, and families. Again, coming back to that caring adult piece. In our experience with Student Aware, what makes this program truly effective is the ability to create structured yet approachable pathways for students to share their concerns, whether they're related to safety, mental health, or even peer conflict. And key there is without fear or judgment or retaliation/suspension, expulsion. And we believe that happens for those that need it the most. Because again, thinking back to what we talked about earlier, these are the students that are flying under the radar. They're not the acute issues that pop up in school. These are kids who have gone to an internet search to demonstrate a cry for help as opposed to doing something externalized. We believe when students feel heard and know adults will respond with care and action, trust begins to build, and that this trust is foundational to any safe and supportive school environment. It's not about having the right tools. It's about cultivating a culture where those tools are used with empathy and consistency, whether that's student aware or some other program or support mechanism that you're using at your site. So that would be my piece of advice, and really happy to hear from Aaron and Nikki. I was, like I said, I learned just as much as I hope I imparted.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you so much. Um, so much for being here and sharing your advice and your wisdom and your experience. We've got some good time for some Q&A, and I know that there's a couple questions that have popped up in the chat that I saw. So Emily had a question for Aaron. Elaborate on the student coordinator position. So could you speak to that?
So that's the role that Nikki was in that she's describing. And so the role is a 0.5 position housed within school social work. The other 0.5 of that same role is the regular social work role. And when the coordinator is in that role, what they're doing is really monitoring the flags that are coming through student aware. There's also work done supporting administrators. So when we launch, if we need to launch an investigation, and not every flag results in that, but when we do, then there's support and opportunity to engage administrators around how it is that they're thinking about those concerns and how they're responding to them. And then there's guidance provided around what that response might look like. And so some of the follow-up might include, in a really extreme situation, it might include a student needing to go to the hospital. And in other situations, it's a much more preventative check-in response and support provided to a student who needs that. And so it's really varied. The coordinator is also collecting the data. So they are collecting information about the reason for the flag and about the response. And our response could be, as I've sort of described, a bunch of different things, but some of that also might include a referral to social work. So we've got sort of the data on, over all of the work that happens over the course of a year, how many of those responses have been supported by a specific outcome. And so they're doing that work too. And then that data is informing the tier one pieces. I hope that helps give like a broad sort of overview of what that looks like in our board. And it's different in other boards, I understand.
Yes, it does. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I can share anecdotally being connected with a lot of districts and boards across the country. There are some that don't necessarily have a designated position the way that Waterloo Catholic does. Sometimes student aware is off the side of someone's desk. In an ideal scenario, there is a person that is like designated as the lead on the project. But again, depending on resourcing and all of that, you kind of have to do the best you can with what you have. But I really love, yeah, that Allison, and I know Nikki was in that seat earlier, that your district has that position prioritized. There was another question for you, Aaron, from Tanya about one of the you mentioned SEL as the second tier, our second pillar, and common caring adults. What was the first pillar that you had mentioned?
I put a comment in the chat if folks want to scroll
Okay.
down just to see the 3 pillars. So 1 is trauma and stress informed classroom practices. 2 is teaching neuroscience and social and emotional learning skills. And 3, which is at the foundation, is safe relationships and regulated adults. And then I populated our 1-page image in there too. And when I talked about staying the course, this is what I mean. We're staying the course with this model in alignment with School Mental Health Ontario's priorities and PPM 169 and those sorts of things, but really ensuring that we're supporting schools to continue to build this, knowing that this will help us to reduce risk that happens inside schools and increase safety.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. I will also mention there was the article that was included with the invite that went out that was inspired by Scott's sort of thought leadership. We have a case study coming out for Waterloo Catholic District School Board that's going to be sharing some of the results and the stats that they've recently shared in a report. So I will just share anecdotally, I was really excited to see like the self-harm category that is quite common actually is starting to go down. You can really start to see over the years that a lot of the work it's being reflected in what you're seeing in your report. So that's amazing. We still have some time together. I know, Aaron, you do have to hop off soon. So if you have to hop off, drive safe to your next meeting, and thank you for being here. And I will encourage any of you, if you want, oh, we've got a hand raised. Yeah. So Thava, if you want to, did I pronounce your name correctly?
It's Tava. Hi everyone. I'm Tava Tavaraja. I'm pronounced Rahim. I'm the Caring and Safe Schools consultant with the York Region District School Board here in Ontario. We're predominantly located in Markham, Newmarket, Woodbridge, name a few of our areas that we're in. We're north of Toronto. Scott, my question to you is, since you've kind of adopted this approach, moving towards, restorative approaches and focusing on connection before correction approach and using student aware, have you seen a decrease in your student suspension numbers year over year?
Yeah, I would like to say yes. However, what we are finding is that there is a significant gap between the work we're doing on the ground with caring adults and kind of meeting the need of some of these um, low flying needs initially, and then trying to get to them before they expand greatly. However, we still have a significant number of students who are demonstrating externalized behavior and quite a bit of dysregulation across the district. Um, Really trying to put our finger on that. And the difference there is when those situations happen, we're really trying to help the system understand the response to that. And we have some schools that do a really good job of responding in a restorative way and working to get at the root cause of what is behind the externalized behavior. And then we have some other schools where it is extremely difficult based on the leadership modality of that building. I would say we're having great success in moving the needle towards more restorative, more um, uh, student-centered consequences, if you will, as opposed to the old punitive way. I'll give you an example. Our our long-term suspension and expulsion program has shifted immensely. It is now housed at a local YMCA. And while the students are there, they are getting an education, but they're also expected to provide some support to the Y. There's opportunities to getting involved in athletics. Like, again, the whole notion of the program is while they're in this program, we're going to educate you, but we're also going to help you with skill building, again, attaching some lagging skills work to that. And we've also instituted things like therapy dogs into some of our more high risk um, short-term suspension programs. So we're moving the needle, but our number of suspensions still, for a number of reasons, is still kind of plateaued at where it's at. But lots of good work being done. Still a lot of ways to go.
Thank you
Hope
so
that
much.
answered your question.
No, it did. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That I love that. I'm just having like an aha moment here where having like a suspension program, that is one thing. I think gone are the days when I was a kid. If a kid got suspended, they just sat at home for however many days they needed to. So I love that Limestone has a more holistic approach to support that student in getting back. Amy, I see your question here. Who is actually facilitating teaching neuroscience to school staff, families, and parents? Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know, Nikki or Scott or both. One of you or both of you want to answer that?
I can speak to how that plays out at Waterloo Catholic. So we have our mental health lead, Andrea Snyder, who directly works with School Mental Health Ontario, pulling resources, putting together curriculum, which is then shared with classroom teachers for that ground level piece. And there are different modules that educators can access. There's another program that is used frequently in our classrooms called Go Zen, which teaches some very basic mindfulness-based strategies. So a lot of that entry-level work is actually being done by educators in the classroom. There are certain times, there are situations that may come to light where we have a specific cohort in a school that's really struggling with something. So we can see that happen with like cyberbullying. I've had situations at some of my schools. I'm in elementary, just for context, but in some of my schools where our intermediates are really struggling with like inappropriate sexualized comments and things like that. And so in those scenarios, we can adopt sort of a more collaborative approach where Andrea is providing, that mental health lead is providing really targeted class-wide strategies. If the issue is rooted more in unsafe online behavior. We have a digital citizenship consultant, digital literacy consultant, I think is her actual title. And she will provide that really specific training for classrooms. And sometimes that person will roll it out themselves if the educator is not comfortable or feels like it's a little bit outside of the scope of what they can provide. So we've done it that way. And then in other cases, we have partnerships with Waterloo Regional Police, and they have come in and done a really targeted presentation, one-off, specific to whatever it is that's playing out again, if it's a higher level concern within a cohort themselves. So that's how that basic sort of education is happening, and that neuroscience is all embedded in that. So we have little beings that will come in and meet with me, and they'll say, my amygdala is angry. It's like, it's hilarious, right? Just the language that they're using and the way they describe things. It's wild to me, because even 5 years ago, I've been a social worker for 15 years, mostly in the criminal justice field, prior to education. And so even 5 years ago, when I first started with the board, kids weren't using that language, and that's not what the conversations look like. And it's really encouraging and exciting for me as a mental health clinician to see that shift.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that they're talking about their amygdalas. I took a mindful kids program when I was doing daycare years ago. My kids were young, and yeah, my kids, they know all about their amygdala. And I know the Mind Up program too is fantastic and in a lot of schools. So yeah, kids, and we all know more about our brains than we ever used to, which is great. Scott, do you have anything you'd like to add to that question?
I think the only thing I would add, because we would have similar structures, is that in Limestone we did have done a lot of work at trying to decentralize supports, and so a massive amount of supports have gone back into the school and in the form of their in-school teams, mostly at elementary, a little bit at secondary. And our expectation and goal would be that in those in-school team meetings that are made up of administrators, special education teachers, and then all the support staff that come from our student services branch, if that's a priority, if that's a need and they've been able to prioritize it, then that in-school team will make the decision as to who's delivering that curriculum piece. It could be a social worker, child youth worker. It could be the classroom teacher. It could be the special education teacher who has received specialized training. It really comes down to that school determining what it needs and what's the best response to it. That also has some huge growing pains, because, like I said earlier, school leadership is person dependent, and we find there's great variation there. The schools that are doing it well are humming along. The schools that are struggling, it comes back to a capacity issue, and we're aware of that, and we support it from the system as best we can.
Yeah, absolutely. I knew this hour was going to fly. Let's see if we can get maybe one more question. If anybody wants to come off mute and ask or drop anything in the chat.
Thank you so much, Erin. I put a question in the chat regarding the privacy of this tool. I'm just asking because we had quite a heck of a time in our board vetting the vape detectors, particularly those that sense noise in a bathroom. It was a big privacy breach. And I wonder, and I think, I have to say, I think prior to me being in this role, there was a look at the tool, and that whole notion of privacy came up again. And I don't know how you mitigated against those pieces, because our legal had those concerns, and I don't know where it landed, but I just know going through the vape detectors fiasco, so much had to be considered because of the breach of potential privacy. And I'm wondering if that has been mitigated against.
I'm happy to answer, because I think I referenced it earlier. When, like, for this to work, it has to be on our system. So they have to be logged into a Limestone computer and using their Limestone ID. Otherwise, the system doesn't work. And so our legal department and our argument to our IT folks, and then through a legal consult, was that when they sign off on the user agreement, so we have all students sign off, K to 12, that when they use our computers and they use our system, they're going to do what they're supposed to do. By signing that or having the parents sign off, that was our legals kind of understanding that they have agreed to what is essentially a monitoring piece system. So and again, all of that information is kept confidential unless Patty, who oversees the program, sees a pattern of misuse or something gets flagged. So most of the folks have been really okay with that. I think somebody else referenced, we don't advertise widely that we have this system, that we use it. And even after we have to follow up with kids or do investigations, we're still pretty coy as to how we got that information, because it's not really the important part. The important part is there was a concern, there was a question, and then we either found that they were connected and getting services, or we're connecting them to services. So it wasn't too long. I know that other boards have had a bit of an issue, and we met with the ministry way back prior to COVID about this, and they were also concerned about that. And I think some boards that were going down this path that were concerned about it maybe built a little extra in their user agreements that they have with kids and families.
Thank you so much, Scott.
Yeah, thanks,
Can I
Scott.
just add? Can I just add to that? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Just from like the boots on the ground level, the person that's in the role. So the way those searches are flagged, they're identified by a student barcode. And so the student aware coordinator is looking at the search itself and determining whether or not intervention is necessary. So sometimes we get false positives. Sometimes we get searches where once we open the history and we see the searches, like the precipitating pieces leading up to it, it's pretty clear that it's not something we need to worry about. And so when it's identified with a barcode, if we don't move forward or choose not to move forward with an investigation or follow-up, we actually never find out who that student is because it's a barcode and not a name. We only identify the student if we're going to move forward. And on the end of in our role as the student aware coordinator in our board, that looks like me identifying the student, reaching out to that student's administrator, and as Aaron and Scott both spoke to earlier, working with that administrator around just the specifics of the search, coaching around an appropriate response, so not a big, heavy-handed or over-the-top, right? An appropriate response for the issue itself. And then the administrator takes that information and based on the consultation with the social worker / student aware coordinator, then determines next steps. Quite often there's a parent phone call in the mix because it's important that parents know what's going on, but that's it for the most part. So once that's been identified, it's not as though the administrator is now speaking to the classroom teacher or interviewing peers. Like that information isn't disseminating beyond that specific situation and that student and that administrator. And then if there are other folks that do need to be brought in for any reason, so if we are looking at social work support ongoing or connection to community services, that's all consent driven anyway. So none of that takes place without the consent of the parent and or student if they're over the age of 12. So I know I wasn't there in the room for the initial conversations, but I know as our use of the tool has evolved over time, like our privacy officer has been right in the mix at the helm throughout the entire process. And so those are some of the contingencies that are in place to help protect that privacy and the dignity of the student, truthfully too, depending on what the nature of the search is. If it's something more concerning or if it's something to do with pornography, for instance, like we are really mindful of that privacy and dignity when we respond.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can speak to even just like technically the tool itself. And typically student account, like email addresses are encrypted. You can't even tell usually looking at it. It's usually like, characters of the last name and maybe some numbers. So, that is really the only indicator within the tool itself. And it's really the people who are in the district monitoring that then do the connections and decide which ones to action, just like Nikki said. So,
Sorry, just to add to that for the data retention piece that Aaron spoke to, because we do keep track of the searches, we're doing that based on the search itself and the intervention, not the student. So the student's identity is not maintained in that data collection either. Just to add that.
Thanks, Nikki. That's great. Well, the time flew like I knew it would. Thank you all so much for being here. Scott and Nikki, thank you. And to all of you who took the time out of your day to be here and part of the conversation and those who engaged in the chat. I'm going to send the recording out shortly. I'm going to try and capture some highlights from the chat. I'm also going to share some additional resources with you. And just, I hope you stay in contact with each other. I hope you made a new friend today, maybe in the chat. And please feel free to reach out if you are interested in learning more about the Student Aware project for your team to consider. Reach out to me anytime. I'd be happy to answer any questions. And I know that Scott has expressed that you would be welcome to reach out to him anytime as well. So I'll share his contact information in the follow-up. But yeah, oh, and Scott shared it right there. Keen to help, Scott. I love that. Thank you so much. Well, great to see you all. Thank you so much for your time. And I hope we'll all get a chance to gather again to talk about this really important topic.